this sense of self-identity, not one that anybody gave to us. We carved it out of the sandstone, put a few lava rocks around it to shore it up, but it was something we had to create ourselves.
Oh, once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton, I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know.
Welcome to Not Forgotten, a weekly podcast sharing the stories of a place known as Utah's Dixie, and brought to you by the Doc Booth Foundation. Through stories as universal as they are personal, this podcast is dedicated to the memory of legendary family physician Dr. Craig Booth and to defining, preserving, and perpetuating the spirit of Dixie embodied in his life and work.
Hi, I'm Lyman, host of the Not Forgotten podcast. For more than 40 years, I've been writing and publishing with the intent of connecting landscape and story in the American Southwest. I believe the words spoken by a character in a story by Barry Lopez. Everything is held together by stories, he said. That is all that is holding us together, stories and compassion. Dr. Craig Booth was a man of stories and compassion. His personal story is one of the many that have made Utah's Dixie what it is, and his compassion is at the heart of that elusive entity we call the Dixie Spirit. When I first sat down with Maureen Booth and her daughter Brittany Fonsbeck to map out a list of potential guests for the Not Forgotten podcast, the first name that came to my mind was Jeffrey R. Holland. He was also the last person I thought we'd ever be able to have on the podcast due to the incredible busy nature of his life and calling and the fact that he was passing through major health challenges and the loss of his beloved wife, Patricia. But none of those things stopped Maureen from reaching out to him, and as it turned out, he was delighted to accept the invitation to come to our little studio in St. George and spend a couple of hours reminiscing about his childhood and formative years in Utah's Dixie, the place he always has and always will consider home. As a bonus, President Holland's son, Elder Matthew S. Holland, accompanied him into the studio and shared his heartfelt thoughts about how St. George is the beloved adopted home of President Holland's children and grandchildren, a place they treasure and come back to often. Elder Matthew Holland is a General Authority 70 of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He served as president of Utah Valley University from 2009 to 2019, and he's currently the executive director of the Church Communication Department. In my 40 years as a journalist and writer, I've interviewed the likes of Robert Redford and Arnold Palmer, governors, senators, even Dr. Lara. But I can honestly say that I have never been in more powerful, inspiring, or joyful company as I was on the evening of November 30th, 2024, when I got to sit down with the most beloved son of Utah's Dixie. President Holland was born in St. George on December 3rd, 1940, to Frank D. and Alice Bentley Holland. In 1963, he married Patricia Terry. They're the parents of Matthew, Mary Alice, and David, the parents-in-law of Paige, Lee, and Jeannie, and the grandparents of 13 beautiful grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. A student leader and varsity athlete at Dixie High School and Dixie College, President Holland received his bachelor and master degrees in English and religious education from Brigham Young University. He obtained master and doctor of philosophy degrees in American Studies from Yale University. At the time of his call to the Quorum of the 12 in June of 1994, He was serving as a member of the first Quorum of the 70, to which he'd been called in April of 1989. From 1980 until his call as a general authority in 1989, he served as the 9th president of Brigham Young University. He's the author of many books, one of which he co-authored with his wife, Patricia. The list of his accomplishments, appointments, callings, and awards is pages long. Suffice it to say, for our purposes, he is the most widely beloved, respected, and appreciated man who ever grew up beneath the mulberry trees of St. George, Utah. In spite of his ongoing health challenges and the loss he's recently experienced, President Holland entered our podcast studio with his trademark smile and the twinkle in his eye that millions have seen and sensed all over the world. Once we started to talk, the floodgates of memory swung open, and the time passed away like as it were unto us a dream. We are so honored and so excited, so blessed to have you here, President Jeffrey R. Holland, acting president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And sitting on his right hand is his son, Matthew, Elder Holland of the 70, who is with us as well today. And it's just so great to be in this humble little studio and to be able to just spend a few minutes talking to you about what it has meant to you to be born and to grow up in St. George, Utah.
That's a big, broad, wonderful question. Lyman, can I call you Lyman? Is that okay?
Please.
I've called you Lyman all your life.
But I'm going to call you President Holland.
Okay, all right. Well, I lived, Lyman, I suppose, in as idyllic a time and place as any young man could have lived. I was coming to my teenage years in the 50s in St. George. No wars to speak of, a pleasant time really nationally in that sense, a community large enough to love and have fun in, small enough to know everybody. I think I knew everybody in St. George. I think if you took me in a car and drove down the streets of the 1950s St. George, I could have told you every family that lived in those homes. It was that kind of a community. I think a lot of people could have said that. I remember my mother told the story that when I just turned 16 and was able to go to a few parties and dates at that age, maybe I was only 15, 14. I went to a party at the Aldridge home in the southwestern part of the city. Darlene Aldridge was a classmate of mine. And so I went to this party, and I was supposed to be home at 10 o'clock. And lo and behold, I looked at my watch, and it was 10 to 10. And I said, "Excuse me, I've got to go. I'm leaving." And I dashed out the door, slammed the door, and I ran all the way home. Didn't make it by 10 o'clock. I wasn't that good a runner. But I pressed on in the spirit of every Dixie boy that ever had to compete. And I ran and ran until I was ready to drop to get home in order to be home and keep my commitment to my parents that I would be home at a given hour. I don't know why I remember that story, but she told it often enough that it kind of reflected a community that you could run from one corner to the other in a late glance at your watch, and for a kid to be home at the right hour after a teenage party that nobody had to worry about. There weren't going to be any drugs. There weren't going to be any drinks. It was going to be a very calm and sweet little moment together for some good kids. And that's the community I grew up in. Richie Cunningham has nothing on me. He lived in a very depressed and economically sorry community compared compared to me and the joy of living at that period in St. George.
As you shared that, it brought back a really special memory of mine. I attended, when I was in 7th or 8th grade, I attended a party at your house.
Really?
Your baby sister,
Debbie.
we're classmates. We've been friends all our lives. And I was lucky enough to be invited to a party at her house.
That little tiny house?
It didn't seem little and tiny, and I want you to talk more about that. But that was an evening that I will never forget.
Really?
And,
I didn't know about that,
You
Lyman.
were already on your way to all the great things.
There was a big gap between Debbie and
yes.
I. So,
but I remember going to that party, and I remember how special that was. And I don't know that I had to be home, or I don't know what time I had to be home. I probably did, but I probably had somebody pick me up because I don't think I
could have made the
ran
run
all the way home.
Well, I'm sure my mother made it sound like a better run than I made, but
you talk about running all the way across the breadth of the town at that time.
Yeah.
And we're sitting here right now on the new southern edge of St. George, just a stone's throw from Arizona.
Don't ask me to run that. I wouldn't even know how to get home from. This was practically the Arizona Strip from here. So it's grown so much. I keep thinking it'll stop. We always heard that water was the limiting factor, but water must come from somewhere because it keeps growing. So
it seemed like Brigham Young assured us that there'd be water.
I guess. Well, it's been honored. That's 100 years ago now that I heard them, or that the stories are of them talking about water. They certainly were in my day, but keep talking about it. You're finding it somewhere.
You mentioned your mom and dad, both of whom I remember so well, and your mom, just an absolutely wonderful
She
person.
was.
And she always treated me as if I were a wonderful person as well. But I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about your parents.
Lyman, that marriage was maybe the least likely marriage in the history of Washington County, maybe the history of the world. I don't know. Here's my mother, this quaint little pioneer daughter, granddaughter, great-granddaughter of the settlers of the community. Robert Gardner's ancestor on one side and William Snow's, and just back to the founding fathers. And that's what she knew, quilting and canning peaches and all the things that you did as a Latter-day Saint girl. And here comes my dad, this curly-haired, two-tone shoes, piano-playing, honky-tonk member of the CCC, and it was love at first sight. He was the quartermaster at Zion. You need to know that for your history, Lyman. He was the quartermaster at Zion. And so he'd come down to St. George to pay the bills and order food and on and on and on. Well, he went to pay the phone bill, and my mother was the only operator, the old type where you jammed the cords into the wall. And he went in to pay the phone bill, and he saw her and she saw him, and it was love evermore thereafter. But it was a marriage. You talk about marriage. We always say that we marry opposites, and I suppose we do. I always wanted the window up. Pat always wanted the window down, And but they got married in this unique marriage that was just a joy to me and a blessing to my older brother Dennis. We lost a younger brother, just younger than I, as an infant, and then Debbie later on. But they had a wonderful, wonderful feeling and affection for St. George. My dad was sort of this self-taught, self-made man, as so many were coming out of the 30s and the 20s. So he'd sort of created a life for himself as a public accountant. But he always wanted to go somewhere. He was always wanted to be a bigger fish in a bigger pond. So he was going to move to Las Vegas, or he was going to move to Los Angeles, he was going to move to San Francisco. Well, he'd be gone for about 24 hours, and he said, when are we going home? When are we going home? This was home for him. It was, in many ways, the only home he ever knew. He left the home of a widowed mother at 17 with a grandfather who'd been kind of a Charles Dickens figure. He watched his mother hit and struck too many times, so at 17 he got out of the house and went to Nevada to lay rails on the railroad. Really a hard life.
Where was he born?
He was born in Park City, Utah. They were Roman Catholics following the mines out of Ireland. First generation out of Ireland. Went to Montana and mined there, and then came south to Park City on this side of the line, and Leadville, Colorado on that side. And they were sort of back and forth. But that's the family my grandmother came from, and the family, to the extent he had a family, that my father followed. But they both ended up in Park City, and that's where he was born, and she was born a little later. Their families ended up in Park City, and that's where they were born. So then the tragedy of his father dying, my grandmother had 2 little boys, my dad at 3 months, and his older brother Joseph at 18 months. And at, I don't know, maybe a year later, their dad died. My own father's dad died of black lung disease, which the miners got so much. And he died and left her a widow in Park City. And so she goes off to raise these 2 kids all on her own. She stays in the area and becomes a recorder in Summit County, and then she becomes a recorder in nearby Price or Huntington or somewhere. Is that Emery County? I think that's Emery County. Then she taught school in Salt Lake. And can I tell this Latter-day Saint story?
Please.
She moved into an apartment with these 2 little boys and just trying to hang on and make it teaching school. And I think working nights as something of a nanny, which was hard to do if you had 2 of your own kids. But she was just hanging on by her fingernails. And one day, a fine-looking man strides up to her porch, comes up and knocks on her door, and introduced himself and said, Mary. She was Mary Malvey, and then married to become Mary Holland. He said, Mary, you don't know me, but I know you. My name is John Fetzer, and I'm the bishop of the LDS 8th Ward, and you live in the LDS 8th Ward. And even though you're not a member, and we know that, we're not asking you to do anything. You don't have to convert. But we want you to know that as long as you live in this ward, you're part of our flock, and your cupboard will never be bare, and your coal bin will always be full, and I'll always be your bishop, and I'll always take care of you. And he turned around and walked away. She was so impressed. I don't think she ever took a can of tuna fish. She was so fiercely independent, but she was so moved by that gesture and by that affection, but just to walk up and meet somebody and offer it, it was most unusual. And about 5 years later, it took her about that long to, what we'd say, investigate the church. And she joined, and my father joined. He was 14 by then. So 1924 is when he joined the church. I don't know that he was ever all that active, we say. His mother was. He was by turns as a teenager, but he was a member of the church when he met my mother, and she shaped him up, and they got married in the temple, and my older brother was born a year later, and I was born 2 or 3 after that. So that's how I got here, Lyman.
President Holland, when I think of your mom and dad, I think of them as quintessential, the embodiment of the Dixie Spirit.
Well,
your dad in a very unique way, and your mom in that natural,
that's right,
organic way.
I think that's right.
But I remember your father as as being a promoter of
Yeah.
everything good
Yeah.
about this place.
Yeah.
And I remember your mom as just loving everyone
Yeah.
and loving her heritage.
That was them. You have them, Lyman. I'll question you, and you answer these questions. You've got them. My dad loved the community. It was home. He never left. He could have left 100 times. People knew him as a smart guy and a personable guy, and he had 101 offers really to leave, and he never left because this was home. And Mom's family, my grandmother's family, sorry, it was her home. Her family became his, and it's really the only cohesive family that he ever knew. But he loved everything about Dixie. He was a Rotarian and played home on the range as nobody. If you want a keyboard man, you've never had one like Frank Holland. He played for the state convention, national convention. They had my dad play home on the range. He couldn't read an ounce of music, couldn't read a note of music, but he was all over that keyboard, and he was a legend for that. Rex McAllister reminded everybody of that at his funeral, that whatever he'd be remembered for home on the range. But this was his home on the range, and he started Little League Baseball because I wanted to play. I was following baseball on the radio they used to have the game of the day and the game of the week. And I'd get my glove out and throw a ball into it while I was listening to this game. And I knew every major league player, I think, on every team. But I said, Dad, there's nobody to play. We have to kind of piece teams together. And he says, I'll take care of that. So we got Jack Phoenix and who else? Leon Watson and Neil Lundberg and Bill Barlocker. And he just got some guys together and said, cough up, buy some uniforms, organize these kids, and they're going to play baseball. So they did. That was the birth of Little League Baseball.
I did not know that
that's
story.
True. That's true.
And it's so wonderful to hear it because I was a beneficiary
of course
of
you
that
were. Of course
years
you were.
later. And to think that your dad was at the heart of
He did that. He did
Dixie
it and loved
Little
it.
League.
Came to all my games. It was fun. He started the Little Princess program on the 4th of July. He didn't think anything were done for the little girls. So he personally started that and eventually handed that over to somebody. But things with the 4th and things with the rodeo he just loved the community. He had so much energy, had too much energy. He was always ready to about blow the gaskets on things. But that's what he brought to it. And then my mother was this, as you say, this staid, quiet little quilting, peach canning pioneer woman. So it was a very exciting marriage and home and family. But my dad really did. You have him right for an outsider, if you will, who came in and stayed and contributed. There were a couple of other people. Dick Hammer was a CCC boy. So anyway, those were memorable times.
When you share those stories about your mom and dad and what they came from, it's quite different. And your mom's is a full LDS pioneer background.
You can't get more. You can't stuff more.
How do you think this place shaped those people, and how did those people shape this place?
Well, it always works that way. They have an impact on the community and even on the land, and the community and the land has an impact on them, no question about that. We were rehearsing today, we were remembering and talking about with Matt and his family and his sister of the early days when Matt's great-grandmother would put his grandmother out on the doorstep for my Uncle Levi to pick up in his wagon to go to Pine Valley. The day school was out, the minute school was out, they'd be ready, my mother, Alice, and her sister, Irma, and they'd be picked up on the front door of the Bentley home, and Uncle Levi would take them to Pine Valley on up to live the entire summer.
And that Uncle Levi was?
Snow.
Levi Snow,
yeah.
Who I remember.
Right. You'd know him, Earl's dad.
Yes. I actually got to ride on the range with him when I was 13 years old.
They said he never, ever in his life wore anything but a Levi jacket when it was just colder than Greenland. And Earl said of his dad, he was the toughest little cowboy I ever knew in my life. Freezing cold, but he'd ride and be comfortable and be happy. And
That's exactly how I remember him. In fact, I remember riding through a rainstorm with him.
Really?
And I thought, he's so slim,
So
so skinny.
yeah, he's tiny.
He can kind of dodge the raindrops.
Well, he was thin. I don't know if he's that thin, but anyway.
What a great fellow.
So they live summers in Pine. But what I'm recalling that for is you talk about them enjoying the community, but then the community and the land giving back to them, that shaped their childhood and their memories. And I grew up on the Red Hill. I was on the Red Hill every day of my life that I can remember being old enough to be there. We were only 50 yards, 100 yards from the base of the hill, and it was just natural for me to be up there. Well, everybody comes and admires that hill, and I admire it, but to the degree that I was there, that hill was in me, and it's just part of my makeup to see it now and to see that Dixie inscribed on the stone and to have the D on the black hill. I've never, ever quite gotten over the scars that have come into the side of that hill, but I won't raise that lest the Chamber of Commerce be terrified. But I wish the pristine beauty of that black hill were still there, but it's still a lovely, beautiful place.
What you're describing is that literal red sand in your shoes.
Yeah,
I mean, not just figuratively, but...
No, it's not figuratively, it's literal. If you went home and dug out some of those old play socks, I probably got sand in them right there. So my mother washed out a lot of red sand. Yeah.
So you've mentioned some folks, but growing up here, who are some of the folks that you remember that maybe had an impact in your...
Your grandfather was a legend in this community. He was as sweet and as good and as pure a man as ever walked the earth, Lyman. You probably know that, but he was.
I was 16 when he died, so I didn't get...
Well,
I was kind of a crazy teenager at that time. I didn't get to know him.
Well, you got to know him
as
some,
well as I would have loved to.
I knew your dad better than I knew him. Your dad and all the brothers thought of Uncle Kenny today, I always do. I don't talk about it, but I always do, driving back and forth by that stretch of hill going to Vail. But your grandfather was a legend in this community. Uncle Harold Snow was a temple president, I don't know what, for 20 years or some extended period of time. B. Glenn Smith was my scoutmaster, had more Eagle Scouts, I suppose, than anybody in the Boy Scouts of America. We didn't do much to earn them, but he earned them year after year after year and got us the merit badges that qualified. Gene Gregerson was a sweet, sweet man who, with people like Neil Lundberg, really, once that baseball was organized, people like the Gregersons and the Lundbergs and others kept it going and kept it organized and organized, other teams that we could play in Panaca or Hurricane or somewhere. And then you get over into school and wonderful, wonderful teachers. People can't believe that Juanita Brooks was my high school English teacher. They said, that can't be. That's not possible. And I said, well, it certainly was possible, and it's true. So she was my high school English teacher, and Bob Dalton was a tremendous influence on me, wonderful teacher and a good friend, gone now. But H. Valhafen Sr., ninth grade math in junior high, and fun teacher and an effective and a legend in his own right, and so on and so on. Those were some of an older generation that I didn't really know well, but knew by reputation and had a real impact on this community. Jack Phoenix was as kind to me and as good to me as anybody ever could have been. I was very close friends with his son John and spent a fair amount of time at the Phoenix home. But Jack and Mrs. Phoenix, Mary, were as kind to me and as, well, just wonderfully loving. Jack had come from outside the community. came to stay and had an impact here. And I used to pump gas at Jack Chevron on 4th East, and Jack Phoenix would come and fill the tanks out of his truck, and we would chat and visit. He always looked so neat. How a man could deliver gasoline and look as good as he looked, I didn't know, but he always did. But I'm just thinking of scattered people who...
How about primary teachers?
Primary teacher Lola MacArthur was my favorite primary teacher. Lillian Snow in Enterprise married my Uncle George. I'm trying to think of others that laced that little bit. But my own mother was the longest serving primary teacher equivalent in the day, though then for a long time that particular program was called Junior Sunday School. You're all too young to ever even heard of Junior Sunday School, but there was a Junior Sunday School that in the old St. George Tabernacle, while people were having Sunday school upstairs, we had Junior Sunday School downstairs. And my mother was the coordinator of that, and she was there for, I don't know, 18 years something, nearly 20 years, long after I was gone. But when I came to graduate at 12, we were supposed to leave and go to the senior Sunday school program. You became a deacon, and you had this graduation to upstairs. But I refused to go. I just stayed, and nobody could budge me. I just got in the chair like this and held onto the side rails and said, I'm not going. So she let me stay. I think I only stayed another few months, but I loved her as a we called her the coordinator. She was the coordinator of Junior Sunday School, and so I remember her more than any of the teachers. But Lola was a favorite. I'm not any good on names anymore, Lyman. Well, I would have been a year.
You're amazing.
I would have been pretty good a year or two ago.
What about Walt Brooks and all your athletics?
Oh well, yeah. The whole athletic thing is I told somebody if they ever wrote a biography, which I have not wanted done, I have refused participating in a biography. Somebody said, well, you can write it with us or you can write it without us, but you get your choice. It is going to be written. So anyway, I've yielded a little, but I've tried to stress that it's impossible to overstate what high school and junior high athletics meant to me and a lot of other guys here. I still believe in it as an activity for particularly boys, but increasingly for girls if they want, but for boys to admire a coach, for boys to train, to know they had a certain eating code and a get to bed on time code and a keep your grades up code, and you do anything for those coaches. People like Reed Blake would scare the daylights out of you. Reed never smiled. I don't think he ever smiled in his whole life.
I'm still shaking.
Yeah, well, I think I am too. We lost only one game when I was in junior high, only one game in a whole series. We were actually pretty good going on to win the state championship a time or two. But we lost to Cedar City. And boy, you did not do that. We made up for it. By coming back and never losing to them again, ever, in my career. But we lost once in junior high. I regret that day to this hour because Reed just ate us alive in the next hour. I always thought he really sort of liked me, and I thought I was sort of actually kind of a favorite. Well, I was no favorite that day. I went the wrong way. I didn't know how to go the other way. I didn't know. There were 1,000 things I apparently did not know, but that was a coach that I would have done anything for, anything. And then you go to Walt, one coach for every sport, washed the uniforms, washed the towels, cleaned the track, swept the floor in the gym. One coach for everything. Now we've got tight end coaches with 3 assistants, and more coaches than players now. But Walt did it all, and it was a privilege to come down and be at the dedication of that football field in his name, which think you want to note Craig and Maureen's contribution. Craig dedicated that field, and for all I know, had a major hand in getting it established. But first Reed and then Walt, one coach doing everything, and those fun, rewarding junior high and high school years that led on to college in at least one sport for me. But nothing was quite like those teenage years when you do anything for a good man, and Reed and Walt were good men. And I wish every young man could have a coach like that. Most do, I hope. But it was a very rewarding and fun era, and only enough players to move from one sport to the other. It's unheard of that you're a two-sport man now, or let alone three. We did four. I did five in high school, played football and basketball, ran track, and what have I left out?
Tennis.
Well, tennis was on the side.
Baseball.
Baseball, basketball, football, baseball, and tennis on the side. I'm still leaving one out. Track, yeah, well, somebody add them up. But we had to play baseball in and around track events. So some days when the baseball tournament was on the same day as the track meet, then you had to run track or do what you did there, hurry over and put on a baseball uniform and play the baseball game. Or if it was the tennis match that day, then you did the track meet and you ran up and got into some shorts to play tennis. But nobody thought that was unusual here. You had 15 or 20 guys, and you had to play every sport because there weren't enough people to put on the jerseys. So
Which sport did you enjoy the most?
Basketball I enjoyed the most.
And that's the one you played in
college?
college?
I played in college a year before my mission, then came back a year after my mission. I didn't want to play the year after my mission. I came home with other things to do, and I actually had been named the captain of the team when I left as a freshman. And so I felt some obligation. I felt some duty to Ray Inglestead. But Ray left. Ray was gone when I came back from my mission, and a young guy from Delta, Doug Allred, was the new young coach. He was only 28, and I was 22. I could have been his coach. But we agreed. I came to tell him, went out to the gym to introduce myself, and I told him I wasn't going to play, that he probably wasn't counting on me anyway, but I wasn't going to play. And I was living alone. My parents were on a mission. I had to find a way to pay for myself to get through school, and I didn't have time for basketball. And he said, look, just come for 1 year, just come for one part. He said, I'm new, I'm just here. I don't have a team. I don't have people coming back. The others have gone on missions. I don't have anybody. You've got to come. And I said, Doug, I wasn't very good before, and I won't be any good now. I'm a fat returned missionary. And he said, I don't care if you're a fat Episcopalian. You got to come and play. So that's how I played the second year, the year after my mission. But I didn't have my heart in it then. But it was a good year and fun guys to play with. And then I got married and we went off to school, and that was the end of my botched, besmirched athletic career.
When you think about this thing we call the Dixie Spirit, and how much of that played into, or how much of that for you came out of the athletic part of it?
Well, a lot of it, because I'll never forget being ushered into town after the state championship and being ushered into town on the fire engine and going to the tabernacle and having everybody in town turn out. The community was really, really into it. I mean, they filled the stands. You go to a game today, I've gone to Matt's son's game, who is a very, very good basketball player. If he wanted to, he could come back now and play university ball. I don't know that he will, but he's on a mission. But he actually knows how to play basketball. I faked it. But I go to his games, and there's a smattering of people in Bountiful to watch those games. Well, in St. George, the entire community, it seemed, came out for those games. The old Dixie gym, that was so small, so tiny with the overhangs. Why, those upstairs bleachers were full, the downstairs bleachers were full. That athletic thread meant so much to the Dixie Spirit. And there was something, Lyman, you know it and you write about it better than anybody ever has, but there's something that comes out of Dixie that really did have, when you talk about the Dixie Spirit, that can be kind of cliched, as if everybody was going to say they had a spirit. Well, they don't. I don't want to minimize what other high schools felt, but other high schools, I don't think, were so inextricably linked with the kids, the team. And so when you talk about the Dixie Spirit, are you talking about the kids? Are you talking about the sport? Are you talking about the community? Are you talking about the gym? You're talking about all of that in St. George. I don't believe they had that everywhere. They had some good teams playing some good winning sports, and the guys were good guys. But I don't think, I better not name places because I'll get in trouble in the interview, because I am now an apostle to all the world. But I don't think there was a defined Southern Utah Dixie Spirit package that really was that intense and that complete and that defined. There really was something you could call the Dixie Spirit, and it meant something more than a ball game. It was informed by the game, but it wasn't limited to that.
Wonderful how you've expressed that. And I wonder, it's the people, it's the history, but I think it's also the place.
Yeah,
There's something about this place.
There's no question. You said that better in one sentence than I did.
No.
Yeah.
But what is it about this place?
I don't know I don't know. I've asked that 100 times, maybe 1,000. Why? That you said it. That's what I wanted to stress about that other comment. It was a place. I don't think you get a lot of other places defined. You might have a place sort of that you could draw a line around in the Uinta Basin or Cache Valley. You'd have a few of those. But here it was very much the place defined by these red ledges and lava flow bluffs, and it was almost something that you could put a pencil to, and you got the whole package, and it was the land. What did Frost say?
Let's see, didn't he say the land was ours before we were the land's?
And that's how it was here. Before we got here, the land was ready to shape us and form us. So if it goes back to those first pioneers, if it was that hard work and that destitution and that inability to find anything to eat or to drink, soil that was always alkaline and floods that always came every spring, what that dam washed out, the Virgin River flooded and washed out dams for 38 straight years. Well, at some point you get discouraged and go. A lot of people did.
And then you add to that the isolation. We grew up in this town down here in this corner, kind of isolated. And I don't know, do you feel like that plays into it, that we just had to figure it out
You
for
had to
ourselves?
do it yourself, yeah. I always got mad that the state papers never, ever recorded a Dixie High School box score, ever, in any sport. It was like a prehistoric period where lines didn't run from St. George to Salt Lake. So you had to do it yourself. We would create that. We would do our own sports stories, or we would report on which play Myrtle Henderson was putting on, or Beth Cephas. I left Beth Cephas out as one of the 2 or 3 most influential teachers in my life ever. And I loved her. That we had to make up what the Deseret News or the Salt Lake Tribune didn't cover. And I'm not speaking only of sports. It was whatever the community was doing. Nobody even knew we existed down here. We were somewhere down near the Arizona Strip. They kind of knew that. But so we made it up. We did it ourselves. We We fended for ourselves. And that added to this sense of unity, this sense of self-identity, not one that anybody gave to us. We earned it. We collectively, everybody, I'm talking about everybody, we carved it out of the sandstone, put a few lava rocks around it to shore it up, but it was something we had to create ourselves.
This concludes part 1 of our visit with President Jeffrey R. Holland. Watch for part 2 on the Not Forgotten podcast.
The Doc Booth Foundation is dedicated to empowering individuals through educational opportunities and promoting mental health advocacy. Through scholarships and funding for important community needs, the foundation perpetuates the can-do spirit of the founders of this community, using the lessons of the past to chart the course for a better future. Make your tax-deductible donation at docboothfoundation.org. Not Forgotten is produced by Ricky Valadez and made possible by the generous support of St. George Area Zag Stores, industry-leading tech support and accessories. Lyman Hafen's books can be found at lymanhafen.com.
Once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton, I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know. We came to Dixie